I used to believe marriages fall apart slowly, one tiny crack at a time. But mine collapsed in a single moment at 2 a.m., the night I whispered into my phone that my husband was ordinary. I said it like a joke, like a silly complaint from a bored wife. But deep down, I meant it. And I never imagined Dan could hear me through the bedroom wall. He didn't say anything that night. He didn't confront me. He just lay there quietly while I betrayed him from 12 feet away. Dan is a computer engineer. He talks about servers and code the way poets talk about love, with intensity and passion. I used to think it was cute. Then I started resenting that passion, because it wasn't directed at me anymore. He would sit at his desk for hours, headphones on, while our marriage gathered dust in the corner. I was tired of stability. I wanted excitement, the kind that made my heart race, made me feel seen, wanted, important. Then Scott returned to Chicago. Scott is my cousin. Not by blood. Our moms grew up together, so we call each other cousins. He's the golden boy of the family. Gym freak, cocky smile, expensive clothes, perfect body, women drooling over him everywhere he goes. He once told me, life should be lived loud. Dan believed in living quietly. Scott was opening a fitness center and asked me to help with the administrative and branding side. He told me I was smart, capable, magnetic, words I hadn't heard in years. The more time I spent with him, the more I remembered the version of myself that existed before predictability and routine swallowed me whole. On day 1, he complimented my outfit. On day 2, the way I talked. On day 10, he said he couldn't stop thinking about me. Attention is a drug. And I got hooked. One night, after an argument with Dan about why we never go out anymore, I found myself in Scott's apartment. Alone. Vulnerable. Drunk on validation. I told myself it was just a late meeting. Then one moment we were talking, and the next moment he was kissing me. I didn't pull away. Cheating didn't feel like cheating when the person you cheated on stopped looking at you a long time ago. The more time I spent with Scott, the more I felt alive. Lunches turned into afternoons in his loft. Lazy kisses, hands tracing places that had been untouched for years. I told myself I was happy, happier than I'd been in a long time. I convinced myself Dan didn't notice. He barely looked up from his screens, even when I got dressed like I was going on a date. Scott laughed when I worried. He's too wrapped up in computers to notice anything. And I believed that. Until the shoe. One afternoon, Scott left his sneakers by the door. I forgot to hide them before Dan got home early. The key paused in the lock. The kind of pause where you know someone has seen something. I froze on the couch, heart hammering, waiting for him to storm upstairs and catch me. He didn't. He just walked in, kissed me on the forehead, and asked about my day. That was the moment I realized Dan wasn't clueless. He just wasn't reacting. And that scared me more than being caught. After that, I noticed changes. He wasn't yelling or asking questions, he was watching. He would glance at me longer. He listened when I spoke. He looked like he was studying something me. Scott insisted I was overthinking. Dan wouldn't fight even if he knew. He'd just accept whatever you tell him. And he knew exactly how to press the selfish part of my heart. We started planning a future. A real one. Not just romance. Business. Money. Scott said if I divorced Dan, I'd get half the house, half the assets. Maybe even alimony. We talked about expansions, marketing, hiring new coaches with money Dan earned. I knew it was wrong. But greed is easy to justify when someone whispers that you deserve more. I lied constantly. Girls' dinner. Late at work. Early meetings. Dan would just nod, like the good husband who trusts his wife. Meanwhile, I was building a new life behind his back. I thought I was winning. Then, Dan announced a fresh start. A new place. Maybe moving out of the house. He said it casually, like he was talking about replacing a couch. But his eyes, there was something cold behind them. For the first time, I thought, what if he leaves me before I leave him? Scott said to relax. He's just pretending power. He won't actually do anything. I believe that too. I wish I hadn't. There's a special kind of arrogance in thinking you're smarter than someone who's quietly been collecting every piece of your betrayal. Then came the stupidest moment of my life, the kitchen intervention. Scott, my best friend Lisa, and I sat Dan down to be honest. As if honesty was something I valued anymore. Scott spoke first, said feelings had developed, that we thought it was best if we ended the marriage. I waited for Dan to break down, beg, shout, show anything. He smiled. Not the confused smile he used to have when he didn't understand emotions. No, this was the smile of someone who already knew the ending of the story. Then he turned his laptop toward us. A folder labeled evidence. Photos. Bank statements. Recordings. Screenshots. Timestamps. Scott.
Me. Lies.
Affairs. Plans to take Dan's money and fund the gym. Every ugly truth in 1080p. My stomach dissolved into nothing. Scott tried to deny everything. Dan cut him off with one sentence. Proving things with data is what I do for a living. And there it was, a man who finally chose to fight. He handed me divorce papers, citing financial misconduct. He handed Scott a restraining order, legally kicking him out of our lives. He handed Lisa a photo, proof to destroy her own marriage. He looked at me. Not angry, not sad. I'm grateful, he said, because now I know exactly who you are. That was the first time I realized I didn't just betray him. I underestimated him. I insulted his intelligence. I mocked his loyalty. And I turned him into someone I didn't recognize anymore. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving a crater behind him. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing the man I thought was weak was just patient. And patience is more dangerous than anger. Scott tried to reassure me. He's bluffing. He'll calm down. Lisa said Dan would probably apologize later, like always. But that night wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Small things started cracking. Scott's car suddenly got parking tickets. Coworkers at my office looked at me differently. Whispers. Questions.
Doubts.
Consequences. Dan had started a war. And none of us saw the battlefield. 2 weeks later, Scott and I were in a coffee shop smiling like idiots, thinking we'd escaped. Scott said, "Talking isn't a crime. What's he gonna do? Make us look bad in court?" I laughed, pretending everything was fine. But even then, I could feel a shift in the air. Dan wasn't reacting, he was planning. I was too caught up in my affair to understand that the quiet husband I'd discarded was about to destroy everything I had left. Everything was about to implode. And for the first time, I realized the man I betrayed wasn't passive. He was patient. When Dan left that kitchen with divorce papers in his hand, I still didn't understand the storm I had awakened. I actually convinced myself he was just acting strong, that he would cool down, cry later, maybe even beg me to stay. That's who Dan had always been in our marriage. Quiet, forgiving, willing to absorb hurt if it meant keeping the peace. But that version of him died the same night I called him ordinary. I was so sure Scott and I were untouchable. We thought love, or whatever we had, was enough to shield us. Scott said Dan had already played his best card, that he had no power left. He was wrong. Dan didn't yell. He didn't threaten.
He didn't chase.
He just vanished into strategy. I first noticed it when people at work became distant. Conversations stopped when I walked into a room. A coworker asked if I was managing things okay at home. My manager suggested I maintain professional boundaries in all communications. I laughed it off, pretending not to understand, but inside panic flickered. Scott, on the other hand, didn't feel panic. He felt annoyance.
People gossip.
Ignore it, he said. Then Scott's BMW got parking tickets, 3 in one morning. The front wheel got booted. He cursed the city, blamed bad luck. Meanwhile, Dan, the ordinary husband, was quietly setting traps we didn't even see. Scott started getting more irritable, short-tempered. Every small thing triggered him. The gym equipment delivery delay, the investors asking too many questions, me asking if he was sure everything was under control. He assured me he was. But his eyes said something else. He was scared. But of what?
Of Dan?
The man he once mocked? One evening, Scott wanted to celebrate a big business milestone. We chose a trendy restaurant and laughed like nothing was wrong. It almost felt normal again. until Scott tried to pay. His card declined. He tried another. Declined again. The server's polite but judging face made my skin crawl. Scott stepped outside to call the bank. I sat alone, picking at melting ice in my drink, stomach twisting. He returned 10 minutes later, furious. Someone flagged fraudulent activity on all his accounts. His words, not mine. That night, I didn't sleep. Because Dan had been sleeping next to me for years, listening, learning, remembering.
Scott didn't know Dan the way I did.
Dan didn't need fists or shouting to destroy someone. He needed a keyboard. The day of the fitness center launch arrived. Scott was nervous, hyperfixated on every detail, lights, banners, speeches, investors, local media. I tried to calm him, but truthfully, I needed calming too. I wore a new black dress. Sharp makeup. The look of a woman ascending into a better life. But the moment I walked in, I felt eyes on me again, not admiration, suspicion. Relax, Scott said, smoothing his hair. This is our night. He started his speech confident, charming. He clicked the remote to show his first slide. But instead of the gym's logo, the screen lit up with a photo of Scott and me kissing in his apartment's hallway. Every breath in the room stopped. Scott froze. Clicked again. More pictures, us holding hands, cuddling at bars, leaving his apartment. Emails. Screenshots. My texts. His texts. The blueprint of our affair. Chaos erupted. Scott slammed the remote, yelling it was a mistake, a hack. People filmed us. Investors hissed insults. A woman threw her drink at Scott. Someone shouted homewrecker at me. My heart was beating so violently, I thought I might collapse. I searched the room through tears, and there he was.
Dan.
Standing near the back. Hands in pockets.
Calm.
Watching the truth explode. He didn't smirk. Didn't celebrate. Just observed, like he was finally collecting the justice he had earned. I rushed outside, gasping, trying to breathe. Dan was already walking away. How could you do this? I screamed, voice cracking. He turned slightly, not fully. I didn't destroy anything, he said. I just let people see who you are. Then he left. Scott didn't come after me. He stayed inside trying to salvage investors who were already deleting his number. And at that moment, I knew I had chosen the wrong man. Scott's business fell apart in 2 days. Investors pulled out. The property owner demanded early termination penalties. Everything collapsed faster than it was built. He ignored me for a week. Then finally called. I need time.
Space.
Focus on myself. All those big speeches about our future evaporated like we'd never existed. He left for Phoenix to start over. He said I should figure out my own life first. Translation. You're a liability now. I cried more over Dan leaving than Scott disappearing. Because Scott wounded my ego.
But Dan?
He broke my heart. Then, work called me into HR. They confronted me with emails, messages planning my business meetings, with Scott using company devices. Violations of policy. Trust issues. Professional misconduct. I was fired. Immediately, I left with a cardboard box full of a life I destroyed myself. Lisa stopped answering my calls. Then I learned her husband saw pictures of us at Scott's apartment. Their marriage imploded too. By trying to build a new life, I burned 3. Dan moved out of the house quietly. I found out from a neighbor. He took everything he needed, then sold the house the moment he legally could. Lawyers said I was lucky to walk away without debt. Lucky. The word felt like a punch. I blamed Dan for everything until I realized blame is a privilege only innocent people get. I wasn't innocent. Dan never shouted at me. Never insulted me. Never humiliated me directly. He just held up a mirror and made me look. And I hated what I saw. 3 weeks after the launch disaster, I showed up at Dan's new apartment. Downtown, high-rise, luxury paid for with the money I once thought would be mine. I felt sick, cheap makeup smudged, hair a mess, fingers trembling. I looked nothing like the woman Scott had bragged about. Dan opened the door. He looked lighter, not smiling but free. His apartment had no trace of me. It was as if our marriage never existed. I begged. I cried. I told him I had been confused, stressed, overwhelmed, that I still loved him, that I regretted everything. "You're not sorry for what you did," he said quietly. "You're sorry you failed." Those were the coldest words anyone ever said to me. I told him I lost everything. "You destroyed your own life," he replied. I just made sure people saw it. I asked if he could ever forgive me.
He didn't hesitate.
"You used up every chance I ever had for you." I tried to touch him. He stepped back. Not with anger, with finality. When I left, I understood something painfully true. He didn't love me anymore. Not even a little. The divorce went through. Dan kept the savings. Dan kept the retirement. Dan kept stability. Dan kept dignity. I walked away with nothing but consequences. He texted me once. The end. But for me, it was the beginning of punishment. My life became a quiet room filled with echoes of all the things I destroyed.
Scott left.
Lisa left. Dan left. And I remained alone with the version of myself I now hated. Every night, I replay the launch scene in my head. The gasps, the phone's recording, Dan's silence louder than any scream. He didn't just expose me. He defeated me. Now, I fear every knock on the door, every phone call, every email. Because Dan never threatened he was done. He simply acted until I had nothing left. If he decided to keep going, I don't think I'd survive it. My world was about to burn to ashes. What I didn't realize was, Dan had already lit the match. 3 weeks after seeing Dan for the last time, the world still hasn't gone quiet around me. It's just gone cruelly silent towards me. No buzzing phone. No messages. No one asking how I am. The only notifications I get are from bills and rejection emails. I wake up every morning in this tiny apartment that smells like mold and old tears. The ceiling has a crack shaped like a lightning bolt, and I stare at it so long I've memorized every jagged inch. I don't set alarms anymore. There's nowhere I need to be. Some mornings, I close my eyes and pretend I'm back in our old bedroom, Dan making coffee, sunlight through white curtains, the cat we always talked about getting someday. But then the sound of a dripping pipe snaps me back into the present, a place where Dan and I don't exist, not even as a memory in his world. I never thought heartbreak could feel like humiliation, but that's exactly what it is. You suffer, and the person you lost doesn't even know you're suffering. I scroll through Dan's profile like a ghost haunting him. He doesn't post photos of people, just life. A sunset over Lake Michigan. A drink on a bar table. A new pair of shoes that aren't scuffed like the ones he wore throughout our marriage. I wonder who bought them. Probably himself. He doesn't need someone anymore. Maybe that's the worst part. He learned how to live without me more easily than I can breathe without him. Yesterday, I tried calling Scott.
I don't even know why.
Habit, maybe. Or desperation. The call rang once and went to voicemail. Then he texted me. "Please don't contact me anymore. I'm trying to move on." Move on from what? A lie? A fantasy?
Me?
He left me with nothing but shattered promises. And Lisa? She blocked me everywhere. She lost her husband, her home, her dignity because of me, and I didn't even get a warning before she erased me. The 3 people who defined the worst decisions of my life all left me alone to clean up the wreckage. And the one person who loved me through everything walked away because I pushed him to.
I try distracting myself sometimes.
I clean the apartment. I read job postings. I dress up for interviews that never call back. But no matter what I do, I end up back in the same place, sitting on the floor, knees to my chest, replaying memories I wish I could burn. One memory keeps coming back. Our 4th anniversary. We were broke back then. Really broke. Dan cooked pasta, turned off the lights, and hung cheap fairy lights around the living room. He danced with me, laughing when he tripped on the rug. I remember thinking, how did I get this lucky? I forgot that feeling. Or maybe I threw it away. Now that night haunts me, because it reminds me of the version of myself that Dan deserved, not the one I became. Last week, I stopped by his old neighborhood. I don't even know what I was hoping to find. Maybe proof that this was all a nightmare and everything was still the same. I stood across the street staring at the house we bought together. Someone else's curtains, someone else's laughter. The life I wrecked now belongs to strangers. I whispered, when did I stop being someone he could love? The night I kissed Scott? The night I lied? Or the night I mocked the man who would have given me the world if I'd asked? All I know is I crossed a line and never looked back until it was too late. People always ask, why do cheaters cheat? I used to have an answer. I told myself Dan was distant. I told myself I deserved more. I told myself I was unloved. But the truth isn't poetic. It's ugly. I cheated because attention felt addictive. I cheated because validation from someone new made me feel powerful. I cheated because I thought I could get away with it. And I cheated because I believed Dan would always forgive me. But that's the thing about good people. If you push them far enough, they become someone unrecognizable. I turned love into war. And Dan won without ever needing to fight. I sometimes imagine an alternate version of our story. I come home early. I see Scott's sneakers at the door. I panic. I confess everything. I beg. I promise to change. And Dan, being the man he was, would have forgiven me. We would have gone to therapy. We would have fought for the marriage we once believed in. Maybe we'd still be together today. But that version of me didn't exist anymore when I still had time to save us. I only discovered remorse once punishment arrived. 2 nights ago, I drank more than I should have and, shamefully, walked to Dan's building. I couldn't go inside. The doorman would have thrown me out. So I just sat across the street staring up at the window I thought was his. I imagined him inside, working, cooking, maybe smiling at a message from someone new. A voice in my head said, he's happier without you. Another voice argued, you're being dramatic. But only one of them felt like truth. I cried until sunrise and walked home with swollen eyes and a sick stomach. I spent the entire next day silent, lying on the floor, wondering how long a heart could ache before it learned how to stop. Sometimes, the regret is so heavy it feels like I'm drowning in cement. I replay every word, every action, every lie. Why didn't I tell him how lonely I felt? Why did I go to Scott? Why did I think Dan would be too weak to fight? Why did I never see his worth until he walked away? And the question that hurts the most, was I ever truly unhappy? Or did I destroy everything because I was too selfish to appreciate what I had? Dan knew exactly how to make me face myself. He didn't scream. He didn't insult me. He didn't humiliate me directly. He just told the truth. And let the truth follow me everywhere. People always talk about revenge like it's flames and fury. Sometimes revenge looks like peace. And the knowledge that the person who hurt you has to live with their guilt forever. I once asked Dan if he could forgive me someday. He said, someday when it doesn't matter anymore. He was right. Because forgiveness won't change anything now. It won't give me back the marriage I ruined. It won't erase the images of me exposed on a giant screen. It won't remove the taste of betrayal from my mouth. And it won't make Dan love me again. That version of him, the one who adored me, doesn't exist anymore. I killed him. In his place is a man who loves himself, who understands his value, who doesn't allow anyone to walk over him again. A better man. A stronger man. The man I always wanted, but only after I lost the right to have him. I know people reading this will judge me. And you should. But if I can offer one truth from the ruins of my life, cheating doesn't only betray someone else. It betrays the person you were supposed to become. I wanted excitement. I wanted passion. I wanted a story worth telling. Now the only story I have is a cautionary tale. I lost my husband to another man. And that man was the version of himself I forced him to become. He didn't destroy my life. He simply walked away from the fire I set, and I burned alone.